The air was brisk in the small town of Maplewood, the kind of autumn chill that hinted at an early winter. Leaves blanketed the ground in fiery reds and oranges, but their beauty was overshadowed by grim news that had gripped the town. On a damp Thursday morning, the body of Harold Green, Maplewood's beloved postman, was discovered in a secluded patch of the woods just outside the town limits. His mailbag lay beside him, its contents scattered as if dropped in haste. The coroner ruled the death an accident, a tragic fall, perhaps caused by a stray root or a slick patch of moss. Maplewood mourned. Harold had been more than just a postman, he was a fixture in the community, a confidant who knew everyone's secrets but never spilled a word. He delivered letters through snowstorms, heat waves, and the occasional bear sighting. His funeral was a small-town affair, complete with tearful eulogies and casseroles delivered to his widow's door. People whispered about how unfair it was for a man so steadfast to meet such an unceremonious end. But just 3 days later, tragedy struck again, this time in the neighboring town of Pine Hollow. Albert "Bertie" Coleman, Pine Hollow's own mail carrier, was found dead in similar circumstances. His body lay at the base of a steep embankment, his mail scattered across the forest floor. Officially, his death was also ruled an accident, but the similarities were too glaring to ignore. Two postmen, both found dead in the woods, within days of each other. It didn't sit right with anyone who heard the story. Detective Sam Thorne was brought in to investigate. Thorne was known for his sharp mind and sharper tongue, a man who had solved some of the state's most baffling cases. His piercing green eyes scanned every detail, his lean frame moving with deliberate purpose as he walked the terrain where Harold had been found. The faint scar on his brow twitched as he pieced together the puzzle. "It's not just coincidence," Thorne muttered to his partner, Detective Maria Ortiz, as they stood over the site of Harold Green's death. Two men in the same line of work, dying in almost identical ways, days apart. "There's more to this." Their investigation began with the postal routes. As they interviewed colleagues and combed through records, a pattern emerged. Both Harold and Bertie had been involved in a decades-long feud between the Maplewood and Pine Hollow postal offices. It was a petty rivalry, the kind that started with misplaced mail and escalated into office pranks, heated arguments, and, occasionally, threats. Old-timers spoke of the mail wars of the late 90s, when disputes over route boundaries had led to fistfights at a regional postal workers' meeting. "You think someone's carrying a grudge that far?" Ortiz asked, raising an eyebrow as they sifted through dusty personnel files. "People have killed for less," Thorne replied, tapping a file labeled Incident Reports, 1997 to 2003. "And if they're willing to kill once, they're willing to kill again." The detectives' inquiries soon revealed that Harold and Bertie had been at the center of the rivalry in recent years. Harold had accused Pine Hollow's carriers of tampering with Maplewood's delivery schedules, while Bertie had once been suspended after Maplewood carriers alleged he'd vandalized one of their trucks. The grudge seemed juvenile, but the stakes, and the body count, were growing. Then came the break in the case. Thorne and Ortiz learned of an anonymous letter sent to the Maplewood post office just days before Harold's death. The letter, typed and unsigned, had warned, "Stay out of Pine Hollow territory, or there will be consequences." The postmaster had dismissed it as a prank and never reported it to authorities. A similar letter was later found in Bertie's belongings, this one warning Pine Hollow to respect Maplewood's boundaries. "Whoever's behind this isn't just holding a grudge," Thorne said, holding the letters side by side. "They're declaring war." As the detectives delved deeper, they began to uncover an intricate web of alliances and betrayals among the postal workers of the two towns. There were whispers of secret meetings in the woods, heated arguments that had turned physical, and even rumors of an underground betting pool on which towns' carriers could deliver the fastest. The deeper they dug, the murkier the motive became. And then, just as they were beginning to piece together the truth, another postman disappeared. The missing postman was Richard "Richie" Hayes, a rookie carrier from Pine Hollow who had only been on the job for 6 months. His disappearance sent a ripple of fear through both towns. Was this a case of escalation, or had Richie stumbled onto something he wasn't meant to see? Detective Thorne wasted no time. He and Ortiz drove straight to Pine Hollow, where Richie had been last seen leaving the post office on his usual route. The weathered streets of Pine Hollow felt heavier under the weight of suspicion, the tension between the two towns now palpable. Thorne noticed wary glances from the townsfolk as they approached Richie's route, a mix of curiosity and fear etched on their faces. At Richie's last known delivery point, a dilapidated cabin on the outskirts of town, they found his mailbag abandoned on the porch, but no sign of the young man. Ortiz examined the bag while Thorne scouted the area. Something about the scene felt staged, too clean. "There's no struggle," Ortiz said, frowning. "If he were taken, wouldn't there be signs? Scattered mail, footprints?" Thorne nodded. "Unless Richie left willingly, or was forced to." Back at the precinct, the investigation shifted gears. Ortiz dug into Richie's past, uncovering a surprising connection. Richie was the nephew of a retired postal worker, Frank Hayes, who had been a central figure in the mail wars of the 90s. Frank, it turned out, had been fired for instigating a brawl that left a Maplewood carrier hospitalized. His bitterness had only grown over the years, and he was known to rant about the injustice whenever the topic of Maplewood came up. The detectives paid Frank a visit. The old man lived in a cluttered house filled with faded newspaper clippings and memorabilia from his postal days. At first, he denied knowing anything about Richie's disappearance or the deaths of Harold and Bertie. But Thorne noticed a faint smell of smoke in the air, and Ortiz's sharp eyes caught the edges of burnt papers in the fireplace. "What are you burning, Frank?" Thorne asked, his voice calm but firm. Frank's bravado crumbled. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he muttered, slumping into a worn armchair. "I just wanted to remind them who was in charge. Teach them a lesson, like the old days." Under questioning, Frank admitted to orchestrating the anonymous letters and sending Richie to deliver messages to key players in the feud. But things had spiraled out of his control when a small group of rogue carriers, loyal to Frank and eager to reignite the rivalry, took matters into their own hands. Harold and Bertie, both outspoken opponents of the feud, had become targets. Richie had discovered their plans and tried to intervene, but they'd taken him to silence him. "Where is he, Frank?" Ortiz demanded. "Where's Richie?" Frank hesitated before giving them a location, an abandoned mail-sorting depot deep in the woods, used decades ago before newer facilities were built. Thorne and Ortiz organized a team and rushed to the depot. The building was a crumbling relic, its walls covered in graffiti and its roof sagging. Inside, they found Richie tied to a chair, bruised but alive. His captors, a group of 3 men, all current or former postal workers, were caught off guard by the raid and arrested without incident. As Richie was freed, he told the detectives everything. The men had been emboldened by Frank's rhetoric, believing they were avenging old slights and restoring Pine Hollow's honor. Harold and Bertie had stood in their way, and Richie, young and idealistic, had become a liability when he threatened to expose them. In the end, justice was served. The rogue carriers faced charges for their crimes, and Frank, while not directly involved in the killings, was charged with conspiracy. The towns of Maplewood and Pine Hollow, shaken by the violence, vowed to put their differences aside, though the scars of the rivalry would linger for years. As Thorne and Ortiz drove back to headquarters, the autumn sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. "Think they'll really bury the hatchet this time?" Ortiz asked, her tone skeptical. Thorne glanced at her, the faint scar on his brow catching the light. "Maybe. But grudges don't die easy. People like to hold on to them, they make life seem simpler, even if it's not. Let's just hope they've learned the cost." With that, they drove on, the woods behind them growing darker, and Maplewood's flickering streetlights appearing in the distance.